Welcome to the Africa Speaking Podcast. The podcast discusses critical issues about the African continent. It is brought to you by Teresa Communications in Nairobi. My name is Kimani Njogu. We continue with our second episode in our two-part series of this podcast on radical Pan-Africanism with Chief Justice Professor Willy Mutunga, President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. I'm going to ask you a very personal question.
Yeah.
So you were an official of the University Staff Union?
Yes, as a Secretary General.
You are the Secretary General?
Yes.
Since then, of course, you've done lots and lots of work to build movements and also to work at different levels of our society. Could you just share a little bit of this journey, your personal journey, and its contribution, in your view, to radical Pan-Africanism? Because I have known you for at least 40 years of my life.
Over 4 decades.
Yeah, over 4 decades.
Yeah.
If you could just share a little bit of that.
Yeah, I've never reflected actually on, it's a great question on how particular people, me, Shivji and others, in what they have been doing. The human rights movements and social justice movements, when we started the embryonic ones in the 90s, we quickly had the East African solidarities. We had the East African one that was Kituo cha Katiba for East Africa. Yes. Connecting the three. The three countries.
Currently in Uganda, right?
Yeah. It's headquartered in Uganda. But the idea also, Kituo cha Katiba in Uganda, connected with other human rights movements across the continent. Again, creating a people-to-people human rights movement across the continent. With its messaging. And the messaging, of course, as you very well know, is a middle-class one.
Correct.
At that point. Correct. The bridge that was being built between the middle-class human rights activists and their grassroots compatriots, the construction hadn't started. Because we were just incubating RPP.
The Release Political Prisoners Pressure Group.
Yes.
Which was very active in the 1980s and continued, to be very active in terms of agitating for rights and fighting for prisoners of conscience.
Yeah. And in terms of, I remember this artist group called Osibisa. They were singing about radical Pan-Africanism. So it's the aspect of artists. I remember that. Where one of the songs they say, we know we are going somewhere and we know where we are going and so forth. So what you have asked, I can only relate it to social justice and human rights movements, because they also dovetail to global.
There was also connection. I mean, the fact that what's going on in South Africa and what's going on in Kenya, what's going on in Tanzania and Uganda are all connected, as it were.
Yeah.
In your case, you were also working closely with people in South Africa.
Yes.
The human rights groups in South Africa and the various formations.
Yeah, but we were actually, to be quite honest, we were not thinking of radical Pan-Africanism. It seemed our thinking was, let's build these people-to-people human rights movements. And they then all got reflected in what we are now calling transformative constitutions, which is still going on in Africa, Kenya, Tanzania has a draft, Gambia has a draft, South Africa, has it. And the movement for transformative constitutions has certain provisions about Pan-Africanism.
Absolutely. And if you tie it up with the African Union Agenda 2063, where for example, the African diaspora is viewed to be like the sixth region of Africa. So you have North Africa, Eastern Africa.
263 has some, very, very, very interesting proposals.
Very interesting proposals.
Yeah, but they just like our constitution.
So, but how do we realize this? How do we realize these ideas?
That brings us to the issue that is a burning question now in a lot of African countries, the issue of authentic and alternative political leaderships. And when you look at the Kenyan experience on the implementation of the transformative constitution, we have no doubt that there is no way these conservative ruling classes will implement, transformative constitutions. Okay, they don't. They spend a lot of their time trying to claw back.
Because it's not in their interest.
It's not in their interest. And I think when we talk about 2063, if it's going to be implemented by the thugs and the rapists and the thieves who rule Africa, it's not going to work. So it means that Africa is ripe for, resurrecting the Amilcar Cabral, Sankara, Nkrumah, Nyerere, Gaddafi. Because that's where we will get that vision of basically saying 2063 is a great idea, but who is going to implement it?
So political power still continues to be critical in terms of facilitating that transition.
Without a doubt, when Nkrumah talks about the political kingdom, because we know now concretely that without capturing political power, any chance that there will be progress, it's a dream. Okay? And we have examples of Bishop in the Caribbean. We have this young man, Thomas Sankara. 4 years.
Burkina Faso.
Yeah, and you look at the
impact.
The reform, the impact. So we have Botswana, where we can learn also of a political leadership that is not stealing, a political leadership that at least listens to, the voices of the people. And the people talk of Mauritius as well.
Mauritius, yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So we have examples, and that's why I was always thinking that, like when we've started now discussing what is called the Pan-African progressive jurisprudence, where we are saying different courts in Africa interpreting the African and People's Human Rights Pact, and there are a lot of judiciaries coming up with, progressive jurisprudence. And you see, there are these conventions that under Article 2 of the Kenyan Constitution, we have become part of our law. So we have international law and we also have regional laws. And the regional laws are very important for resurrecting, radical Pan-Africanism. So again, I think we have to look at this issue from a perspective of sites of struggle. Just like you look at the youth, you look at the women, but then we don't ignore what's happening to some institutions, state institutions that actually are starting to basically say, this colonial state has to be decolonized. These resources that are being exploited and the cause of our poverty have to be changed. And issues of land, for example. I always reflect on the Mau Mau, and I said, how accurate was this Kenya land and freedom? When you look at now what is happening in Palestine, you see again the land, of the Palestinians being taken over, and then allied to it, torture, no freedom of expression, no artistic freedom. Anything is
I have
wrong.
actually written a very small piece on land and the connection between land and the democratic trajectory. That you can never talk about democratic struggles without reference to the question of land. So that at every single moment, land is at play. Whether one is talking about land even in the African diaspora, and you look at the Black Power movement and the struggles over space.
For their land and Fort Mills.
Absolutely.
They didn't leave the land. It was first. And then you go to other resources.
Absolutely. So land becomes such a critical component. But really, would this then radical Pan-Africanism mean an erasure of the state the boundaries that we have so that we kind of delete and reconfigure. Because at 1963, African heads of state are saying, look, we are not going to dismantle the boundaries. We retain the boundaries as they
and
were.
they created then the conflict that we see.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine if the boundaries were changed.
Yeah.
That is what we call people to people. Dividing the Maasais into Kenya Maasais and Kenya, the Kurias and then the Luos and whatever. If you have, as envisaged, now we have DRC in the East African community.
Correct.
If we take those countries, including Ethiopia,
Yes.
you have a community of 200 million people.
Absolutely.
And if they have their own currency.
For the region.
And the military is not what these thugs are trying to show by basically using a force that they have created to go and then fight in DRC.
Correct.
First of all, I think that radical Pan-Africanism is not going to accept this occupation by, Kenya in Somalia, Uganda, Kenya and Rwanda in DRC, and what is also happening, in Ethiopia.
Yes.
A bigger unity. And ECOWAS, the way they pacified Gambia,
Yes.
has given us the indication that these bigger entities
Yes.
can focus on issues, and they will soon focus on these issues of African resources,
Yes.
water and everything.
Absolutely.
They must.
Absolutely.
But then, you can imagine if the Sankaras were around. When they went to AU, when you look at the speeches they were giving, it's the same vision we are talking about.
Absolutely.
You're saying unless Africa starts imagining that it can be an empire, unless we...
Powerful. And of course, this would have happened in 1963 if there was consultation with the people. So the decision was actually made in Addis Ababa by heads of state.
There wasn't.
But they would have retreated and said, look, let's not make this decision now. Let's go back to our communities and reconfigure the various spaces. But of course, they were also products of
they were being pushed very hard by the empires, the external empires, not to go that way also. We have to realize that. And when we now talk about robust public participation, that's what you're talking about. This notion of the elite that the ordinary people don't know what's going on. They don't know their material interests that we've got to decide for them.
It's actually arrogant, right?
It's intellectual arrogance. It's also class arrogance and whatnot. And I think they could have said in 1963, let's have a plebiscite or whatever, a referendum. Let the people tell us the kind of unity of Africa that they desire.
Correct.
Even if they were going to delay that unity of states.
Correct.
But that again required people like Nkrumah. It didn't. People like the guy who was ruling Ivory Coast. All those characters. Yeah, and Boigny and whatnot. Yeah. So it wasn't going to happen, and I think that the struggles for these alternative and authentic and even nationalist leaderships that are in anti-imperialism and actually anti these ruling groups.
Yes.
If they can emerge, then, the movement towards a radical Pan-Africanism will be strengthened that way, because you have spokespeople, women and men, in Addis Ababa who are basically saying we've got to think about the African empire. We have to think about securing our, resources. And it's land, what is underground.
And our people, and the people themselves. Our people are actually critical resources, which takes me to our people, which is basically the recognition that the majority of people on the continent are youth. They are actually under 35.
Yeah.
So, in your view, what is the role of the youth of Africa in pushing this idea forward, this idea of radical Pan-Africanism forward, especially given the ways in which they are already connected through music, through film, through, other forms of creative connections.
They're well connected.
Yeah. So what is your view, and what do we need to do?
As we say, what is well said by another is mine.
Yes.
I just want to read, in answer to that question, what Karim Hirji, the Tanzanian revolutionary, says, and it's very specific to
the youth of Africa.
Yeah, he says African liberation has to be founded on 3 principles: socialism, regional cooperation, and regional self-reliance. Okay? Instead of being mired in seeking solutions within the confines of current neoliberal system, African youth must have bold dreams and think in terms of fundamental transformation. There's a reference to Yash Tanton.
Yash Tanton, right? I used to read his articles in the debate, the Dar es Salaam debates.
Yes, and he wrote Trade is War.
Yes.
And now he has written another very, very interesting book called Common People's Uganda.
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it has great perspectives on China, which is something we need to flag. And so he says that was the vision of the radicals of the earlier era. And we have discussed them.
Yeah, we've discussed those.
We have discussed those radicals. And it's a vision that the youth of today must adopt. Okay? And he goes on to say the technological capacity to resolve all the critical problems facing humanity have been present at least for half a century. But it's the stranglehold of the rich and the powerful classes and nations over state, politics, media, and thought processes that have prevented that capacity from being, utilized. And so he ends by saying, let this be the cry of the African youth. And this cry he's talking about is, some student clarion call in Dar es Salaam, which was, the time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. And they were quoting Martin Luther King. So he's saying, let's be the cry of African youth of today as well, all right? For the future of Africa, and indeed of humanity, lies not with modern day gooders, donors, etc., but with those who will boldly mobilize and organize the masses for a fundamental transformation of these new liberal and capitalist economic systems.
Karim Hirji.
Yes. So
what's the title of this book? Because
the title of the book is, and you might want to get it.
I will.
Under Education in Africa, from colonialism to new liberalism.
No, I will.
And he looks at education, but he is just like you. He's thinking about that question you have asked about what's the youth, because we can call ourselves, as Wangoi, Wangoro calls us, the young at heart.
Yes.
We can call ourselves that in terms of fueling radical Pan-Africanism. But quite clearly, we don't have the shoulders to carry AK-47s.
Absolutely.
So, and I think when in the same breath when we talk about the youth, because we know there are women there, but it's always good to look at that category of women in this question of radical Pan-Africanism and what there has been their contribution. Whether we talking about Nawal al-Sadawi, Michere Mugo. Some are Kenyans, of course, like Eunice Njeri, who is called Eunice Saleh, right?
Correct.
Amadina Lihamba.
The University of Dar es Salaam.
Yes. Wanjiru Keoro.
Yes.
Of our own. I mentioned Nawal el-Sadawi.
An amazing feminist from Egypt.
Yes, who died, I think, last year. Last year.
Ago, yes.
Yeah, Kenya has also Shalja Patel.
Yes, Shalja Patel, based in California now. Yes.
Yeah. Eva Dadrian, I haven't heard of her. No. Ama Nguyeye, Ama Ata Aidu, we have had.
An amazing novelist.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a Peggy Piesche, Maya Angelou. Now we are going out of African world.
Diaspora, yeah.
Yeah. F. Sutherland, S.E. Sutherland, Molara Leslie.
Yes, Malala Leslie.
Okay, we've heard of that one.
I've read, yes.
Charmaine Pereira, Ama Binay, Dede Amana Wilkes, Claudia James, we've heard of it.
Yes.
June Givani, Aisha Imam, yes. Bibi Bakari Yusuf, Amina Mama, I've heard of that one. Aisha Imam, I have. Zosi Shikata, I have. Wambui Mwangi.
Yes, Wambui Mwangi, yeah, political scientist.
Yes, yeah. And Akidi Okan, Fatuma Baba Muhammad, Fatima Manesi, Miriam Makeba.
Yeah, Miriam Makeba, musician.
Gita Owana, Mudhoni Likimani of our own.
Amazing.
Alice Walker.
Alice Walker, the writer.
I guess Angela Davis. Tuzilune Njia Allen, Amadina Liama, and of course our heroine from South Africa, of course, Winnie, I'm forgetting Winnie Mandela. Yeah. And these are women from Francophone, Lusophone, and Hispanic phone worlds. And Jessica Horn.
The Ford Foundation.
Yes.
Regional rep.
Yes, she's on this ROCO.
Yes.
And
she's done amazing work as both in terms of the creative space and feminism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, Sylvia Tamale in Uganda.
Tamale, yes.
You know, she's done that book on African sexualities. And she has pieces by people like Jessica and others, women.
Yes.
So that is also a resource of all these women that we look at from the continent of Africa and the diaspora.
So we are saying, in other words, Willy, that radical Pan-Africanism would of necessity be driven by youth movements across the continent, women's movements across the continent and beyond.
Yeah, and beyond, because the youth, women, we're talking now about, broadly speaking, the civil society and social movements.
Yes.
But we are also flagging the political aspect.
Yes.
We are saying political even power. These movements will be the force that will sustain that radical Pan-Africanist political leadership.
Which is necessary.
All of Africa, which is necessary.
The political leadership is necessary for the realization of radical Pan-Africanism, which was the aspiration. Because radical Pan-Africanism continues to be really an aspiration. It's not a reality. So how does it...
It's a struggle that has to continue, has to happen. The discussion today here, we're just being intellectuals, laying the theoretical and the abstract foundation of it, but we're also getting into the reality of it, giving examples of this continuity that we see, whether it's Sankara, whether it's Amika Cabral, whether it's Nyerere, whether it's Nkrumah, whether it's Gaddafi. They're also so important. And when we talk about this African leadership that is going to anchor radical Pan-African
aspirations of
it. We are actually very specific. We're talking about a leadership that is anti-imperialist.
So it must be driven principally through the working class, through the proletariat, basically.
Yeah, and the middle classes.
Yes, and the middle classes.
That are beginning to realize that anti-imperialism and if you want to say nationalism, although I leave nationalism as its own thing, if we are creating a radical Pan-Africanism, nationalism will be a hindrance. Because that's what...
be inward-looking.
Yeah, and that's what the states have done. They build on the issue of nationalism as well. So we're talking about a leadership which is going to focus on what we have said about economic currency. Our resources being stolen and so forth, and the realization that we are developing other nations other than the African continent. And that has to stop. And when it stops, of course, it stops the raiding of our African resources. You call the financial outflows that we know about, multinationals and states raping DRC where there are resources and even in our own country, Turkana,
Yes.
there is water, there is oil, and you see
the levels for poverty totally unacceptable.
Yeah, totally unacceptable. So I think you've basically sketched what in the short term we need to build or to start this long journey, or short, I hope it will be short, of radical, Pan-Africanism, because it will breathe life. First of all these wars and so forth, they will be extinguished, with that vision, because peace in Africa then becomes very, very, very important. And the peace is always an anti-imperialist clarion call.
Correct.
All the time. And then this African unity that Nyerere talked about, Gaddafi was talking about, and Nkrumah, Amika Cabral, Sankara, and within intellectuals, let's not forget, Anta Diop.
Oh yes, absolutely. He wrote a lot.
Yeah, he wrote, and there's a book he wrote specifically on African unit.
Correct.
And the other one of barbarity and whatever.
Correct.
So let's not forget the rock of intellectuals that have dealt with this. Shivji.
Ali Mazrui has also written
Ali
quite
Mazrui.
a bit.
Samir Amin is very big on the long road to socialism and creative Marxism. And he's written a lot on Bandung as well. Yeah. Because actually he was there as a young communist.
Really?
Yes.
And of course, even people like Claude Ake. I mean, there are many these African intellectuals who really...
Mukandawire,
Nabudere.
You can have a rock of... Yes, Nabudere is the one who came up with this. And a guy called Lucas Kamisi.
Yes, Lucas Kamisi, the imperialism, the one who did imperialism, social imperialism in Tanzania.
Yeah.
He wrote a very important book.
Yes,
this was in the 1970s, 80s,
yes.
In those earlier days.
Yeah, since you have read that debate in Dar, it started there.
Correct.
So we have then to problematize intellectualism. And this radical Pan-Africanism requires, in the Gramscian sense, organic ones. Like when
the organic intellectuals, in the Gramscian sense of the hegemonies and so on.
Counter-hegemonies. And the fact that they are auxiliaries of social movements.
Correct.
And so you can even personalize that in your own case. When there is a movie by Wanuri,
the one Rafiki,
on
LGBTQ rights.
That's right, and artistic freedom, as you called it, which is what Wanuri was about.
Correct.
The right to think.
Absolutely.
About
and
what is unthinkable, and to imagine.
To imagine.
Yeah, and then you have Kimani Jogu, the intellectual, who is connected. To that movement. Correct. That's exactly what Gramsci had in mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, that organic intellectuals can also be very, very conservative because the whole empire is built by organic intellectuals that are connected, to those forces. So in terms of Pan-Africanism, then we have to have our own raw core of intellectuals who have been bringing these young people together, who have been calling for these solidarities. And there are some, who are not even on the continent of Africa. They are in the African world, but they are talking, about that path.
Absolutely. And you did bring in Horace Campbell,
Walter Rodney,
you brought in all these.
And these guys we were mentioning, Marcus Garvey,
Padmo, and all these other amazing. And the inspiration that Angela Davis, continues to give to younger people. And I remember as a young Kenyan growing up, I read Angela Davis and completely taken over by her imagination, So as we come to the end of our conversation, Willy, I because I know you've done lots of work with the creative sector. If you could make a comment about the role of the arts in this radical Pan-Africanism idea. That would be, there's a way of wrapping up.
It's a great question. Even in our own country, we are beginning to realize, particularly the radical human rights activists, that the new frontier in human rights work and social justice work is actually the artists and activist movement, as they are called. They are very, very, very powerful. And they have broken borders, completely. If it's a great song, as you said, it's being sung all over the place. And I think this message of radical Pan-Africanism, I can't see it succeeding without great contribution of the artists, whether they are singers, songwriters, filmmakers, and then the intellectuals within it. Because if you have written on land and development, I expect Wanuri or the other young woman, what's her name, the filmmaker?
Oh, Judy Kibinge.
Yes,
of
yes,
DocuBox. Yes.
Yes, they're quite a number.
Amazing! I mean, she's directed some very powerful movies. Actually,
yeah. So you see, they are all those women we are talking about, the filmmakers. It's like talking about Lupita Nyong'o. Yeah. She transcends Kenya and Africa, and she's connected to Mexico by birth,
I translated her comic book Sulwe into Kiswahili.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Oh,
I did. When they reached out to me to say, can you do this Kiswahili version? I was like, I'll do this anytime.
Yeah.
And so we have a Kiswahili Sulwe, which again deals with issues of race, written by foremost, artist.
Yeah. So
Lupita Nyong'o,
So basically, I see that frontier as being so critical, anchoring, these others. If those messages of the social justice movements, the human rights and intellectuals and everybody, that is the engine, in my view. And it's the engine that is also in the hands of very young people. It will keep on growing and so forth. You see, for example, when Mwangi was campaigning in Starehe.
Yeah, Boniface Mwangi. Yes.
The involvement, Power 254 is a site of struggle for graduate artists and whatnot. They were involved in that campaign. And their involvement, when the material comes out and it's given to an intellectual like you or me to deal with, I've seen the photographs that my son Alamin took in Starehe. I never thought Starehe was that poor.
Center of Nairobi.
Filthy. Yes. It's in Nairobi. I had imagined, but it's the artists who are bringing these things, either in terms of film, the way Mwangi did the Kenya burning, for example. Yes. So I have no doubt at all that these struggles for, artistic freedom and voices and so forth, that you, Nyairo,
Dr. Joyce Nyairo,
yeah, they used to be on the margins. They have come to the center now.
Absolutely.
So, and that's how radical Pan-Africanism has to understand, and the intellectuals in it and the movements in it, because history records that always happens. You've got to focus on where the engine of a revolutionary movement is, and if you marginalize it, you don't get anywhere.
Absolutely. So, Willy, I really want to thank you today for a fantastic conversation with you.
Yeah.
On a topic that's very close to our heart, both my heart and your heart.
Yes.
And it's a topic of radical Pan-Africanism. Yeah.
Yes, and we have sunk to the politics of it. I've enjoyed it immensely. I think we've glorified a lot of people who are implicated in it. When Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in his struggles about language, if you take that one, it's a strand.
It's a strand
within radical Pan-Africanism.
And language itself, not just as a mode of communication, but an embodiment of histories and tensions and experiences and so on. So that it's not just the way we communicate, it's also the way in which we get into history and experiences and contradictions of society and so forth and so on. This ends our second episode in our two-part series of this podcast with Chief Justice Professor Willy Mutunga, President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Thank you for listening to the Africa Speaking Podcast. Join us in our next episode, brought to you by Triza Communications. My name is Kimani Njogu. For any comments and views, you can reach us through our website, www.africaspeaking.org. You can also reach us on Facebook, Twaweza Communications, or on our Twitter handle @TwawezaComs. You can also write to us on email info@africaspeaking.org.